Hey all, so back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about the Lizard. He's finally here! I know this has been one a lot of people have been waiting for a long time, and it's a very fun kit. Some very unique mechanics. But let's get right into the attributes here with survivability of 3.5. The biggest thing here is the Lizard's regen. Probably doesn't surprise anybody that he has regen, that's kind of a canon ability, but yeah, he will regenerate when struck. And then he combines that with some Unstoppable as a way of getting out of trouble and holding on to that regen, and he can stay in the fight a good long time. Damage of 4.5, he can do a lot of damage. And it's in kind of some wacky ways, so we'll talk about that as we go, but yeah, you play him properly and the damage is significant. Ease of use 2.5, well, we just said the magic words, play him properly. This kit isn't that bad as far as just like building damage. You put ruptures on the opponent, you throw a special 2. It does well, right? But if you really want to access the higher levels of what the Lizard can do and how fast he can do it, then there is some nuance to it, and we'll talk about that as well. Utility of 2.5, there's several niche pieces of utility here that are honestly quite powerful, but each of them is a little bit off the beaten path, and so I think 2.5 is probably about right. We'll call them out as we go. And then Defender Strength of 2, we already mentioned that on struck regen. If you don't have an answer to that, that can draw out the fight, and if you get hit, you're probably going to be in some trouble. But there are answers to the regen other than just the traditional stuff, so we'll call that out as well. So getting right into the abilities, the Lizard is immune to poison and is also immune to heal block while under the effect of a buff or an unstoppable effect. And that might sound kind of weird, but his personal unstoppable is related to a buff trigger, as we'll get to later. So that's kind of just making sure that you get credit for the buff either way, right? You're immune to heal block while you have a buff, including that from the Dexterity Mastery, or when you've turned that buff into an unstoppable. Additionally, his regen rate can only be reduced below 50% by skill champions, so Despair, Petrify, all of those things, you're not going to be able to heal reverse the Lizard with Science champions or somebody else, but skill champions will still have full access to Despair. So if you throw a bunch of debuffs on him, you can reduce his regen rate by 100%, which means in PvP context, you're going to be bringing it down to that 15% left over from the Recovery Mastery. We mentioned the regen, here it is. When struck, gain a regeneration passive that recovers 60% of the damage taken by that hit over 20 seconds. Guaranteed critical hits do not trigger this regen. So this is kind of similar to Anti-Venom's regen, except only guaranteed critical hits avoid the regen. Regular critical hits will still trigger that regen, which is significant, right? Because 60% of the damage taken, and then you factor in the Recovery Mastery, that can be a lot of healing. It's not as bursty as Sinister's, but it will add up. Now, that said, when you're fighting him with a skill champion and they have Incinerate, Cold Snap, or Frostbite, inflicting any of those removes a regeneration effect. So you can use guaranteed crits and bypass the regen entirely. You can flood him with debuffs and use the Despair Mastery to cut down on the potency of the regen as long as you're using a skill champion. If you can avoid him getting buff triggers, you can use heal block. And then also if you're using a skill champion and you don't have a ton of debuffs, you still have the option of bringing one of these 3 damaging effects and controlling the regen that way. So again, if you don't have a counter, it can be significant, right? That's a lot of regen, it'll slow the fight down. But if you do have a counter, it's not that bad. So next up we have Rending Claws. Here's the beginning of where the damage comes in. All of Lizard's attacks have a 25% chance to inflict a Rupture debuff for 6 seconds, and he can get up to 20 of these. That's pretty low damage, but there are a lot of them, and you'll see where more comes in later, right? When the opponent activates a special attack, for each physical or direct damage over time effect on them, other than those from masteries, deal a burst of physical damage. So that means that the Rupture debuffs on them are going to hurt them. It also means that if Lizard is on a node and is placing poisons, degenerations, disintegrations, or bleeds on you, because those are all direct damage types, that would also trigger those bursts, right? Any ruptures from nodes would do that as well. I don't think there are currently any nodes that inflict corrosion, but if that happened in the future, then that would also trigger this, right? So it's adding up all of those dots, and each of them deals a burst of damage on special activation, kind of like a power sting. So this is somewhat similar to the way Scorpion works, because it's not a true power sting, but it's also not quite the same, because this isn't an instant rupture, it is just a burst of physical damage. This damage scales with base attack only, but also scales up with the level of special attack used and the opponent's current power on activation. So if you have a bunch of dots on you and are fighting the Lizard and throw a special 2 or 3, it can really hurt. Similarly, if you're using the Lizard, kind of like with a Power Sting champion, you're going to want to push the opponent to as much power as you dare, because the more power they have when they throw the special, the more this is going to hurt them. Personal ruptures have a 50% chance to be removed when they trigger this burst of damage. So again, kind of like a power sting, some power stings, right? When they trigger, they can be removed. Striking a non-stunned opponent with a heavy attack pauses all personal debuffs on the opponent for 15 seconds, but this does not trigger if the opponent was stunned during any of the hits. So that second sentence might look a little weird, but that means that either hit of the heavy can trigger this pause. It's not just the first hit of the heavy, but the second hit won't trigger the pause if the first hit landed while they were stunned, right? So you're getting credit for either, which is really nice when you're doing heavy counters. If the first hit doesn't land, but the second does, that's fine. It just means that you can't parry heavy and be okay because the stun expired before the second hit. Next up, intercepting the opponent or punishing their heavy or special attack inflicts a tracking debuff for 10 seconds. This includes punishing it with a heavy, so if you heavy counter a heavy or a special, not only do you get the pause, you also get the tracking. And note that this pauses personal debuffs, not just the damaging debuffs, so that tracking itself will get paused. So that's a really nice miscounter there. Next up, special attacks. For the duration of his own special attacks, Lizard is buff immune. Kind of a weird ability, because I'm going to spoil it for you. Lizard doesn't have any buffs in his kit. So for this to come up, the opponent either needs to be placing buffs on you, a node does, or you need to have dexed recently. But any of those are going to go away during that special. And then for each special attack hit that hits, is blocked, or whiffs, you inflict a 20% retribution passive, lasting 12 seconds per level of the special attack, and this is paused during special attacks. So next up, I'm kind of going to run through this and then double back on what it means. Each special attack hit that lands, is blocked, or whiffs, inflicts a 20% retribution passive. These last longer on higher levels of the special attack, and then are also paused during his specials. You can get up to 4 of these, so that's 80% total. If the opponent dodges a hit, retribution is not inflicted, right? So if you're facing the Lizard, you're going to want to dex as many of these hits as possible so that you don't get that retribution on you. If the Lizard is attacking his opponent, basically the only way this doesn't apply is if the AI is rude, right? But as a reminder, retribution, which we've also seen on Spider-Woman, is kind of like the inverse of Daunted. It increases the damage the opponent takes during their special animations rather than yours. So that will apply to the burst of damage from the ruptures or other damaging effects that we saw earlier. It will also apply to the ruptures themselves. Both of those sources of damage are going to get increased by 80%. While these retributions are within 6 seconds of expiring, the opponent is more likely to activate a special attack. So that's a nice little thing where There's not a special bias most of the time, but if you're going to lose a retribution soon, you do get a little bit of one. Next up, we have Primal Rage. This is why the lizard cares about going buff immune when he is immune to a buff or when a buff on him is nullified or staggered. He gains an unstoppable passive for 3 seconds, paused during special attacks. As an attacker, if he's struck while this unstoppable is active, then it goes on cooldown, right? While the unstoppable is active, he also goes unblockable and gains a bunch of attack rating. So this means that you don't want to put buffs on Lizard and then get rid of them, right? But it also means that when Lizard is attacking, if he's messing with somebody who inflicts buff immunity or nullifies or staggers, and he can get that dex on him and have this happen, he gets the unstoppable for free. But remember, he also goes buff immune during his specials. So if you dex and then still have the dex when you throw a special attack, either because the opponent like threw a heavy and then you're throwing the special into that, or because you sidestepped into the special, so you dodge and then immediately throw it as they are trying to hit you. As long as you have that dex buff on you when you activate the special, you're going to go buff immune, become immune to the buff, trigger this unstoppable, also go unblockable, and gain a bunch of attack rate. And that is basically how Lizard wants you to throw his specials, right? He wants to throw these specials while unstoppable. And so that is kind of the second major skill ask of the kit. The first one is if you want a bunch of ruptures on the opponent, you need to try and land those heavies when they're not stunned. The second one is you want that dex buff on you when you are going to throw your specials. Now, alternatively, if you're in some situation where you have another buff on you, then cool. You don't have to worry about that. Lizard gets that for free. But most of the time, you're going to want to make sure that you sidestep into those specials. And that's going to take some practice. Now onto the specials themselves. The special 1 gives a rejuvenate passive for 20 seconds. While this is active, he gains extra attack rating. So this is just going to make the rest of his regens better. And then also you're going to gain a 100% fervor passive for 20 seconds, pause during the opponent's special attacks, and so that's going to make you much more able to stack those ruptures. Their base chance is 25%, now it's going to be 50%. Additionally, with the way fervor works, this does mean you can get around unsteady or glancing, right? So the special 1 can be really nice for ramping the ruptures if you're not already there. If you are already there, special 2 and 3 both deal a burst of physical damage on the final hit, equal to 125% of all the damage the opponent has taken during their own special attacks, up to a maximum, but this resets once the damage is dealt. And then remember, that can then get boosted by the retributions, right? Because this burst of damage is defined before that step, and so this maximum can be decided, can be applied, and then the retribution makes it larger. So this burst can get really, really big. The special 3 deals an extra burst of this damage equal to another 55% of the damage. So the special 2 might be more efficient per bar, but the special 3 does plenty on its own. Both are valid, and again, if you have that dex buff on you when you throw this, you're also going to be gaining increased attack rating. It's also worth noting that any hit that you land that punishes the opponent's special is by definition a hit during their special attack. That's what punishing means. And so any mediums or ideally heavies that you land during their specials, punishing that will also tick up this counter. Nice little thing to do there. And so before we go too much further, I just want to spell out the loop explicitly there, right? In a short fight, you're going to want to hit the opponent where you can, weave in some heavies in response to their heavies or specials so that you have the pause up. You're going to want to throw a special 1, both for the fervor to give you extra ruptures and for the rejuvenate lasting that long 20 seconds, giving you extra attack rating. Then you're going to want to rush to the special 2. As you are doing this, you're going to want to try and keep those heavies in so that you're pausing your ruptures. and you're going to want to try and be pushing your opponent to throw their specials when they have more power, and ideally throwing higher levels of specials. That's going to mean they take more and more damage, and then when you finally throw your special 2, which of course you dex before you throw so that you go unstoppable and unblockable, you're going to deal this giant burst of damage back at them and they're going to explode. And that's basically how Lizard works. I understand that is a relatively complicated loop. You do have to pay attention to several things as you're doing that, but it feels pretty cool because you're an unstoppable, crazy lizard ripping your opponent apart, and I do think it's worth it. It's not that difficult once you get used to it. Yeah, definitely worth taking a try. So next up we get to the signature ability. This increases the potency of personal retributions by 25%, so that means that your 80% retributions at max stacks is now 100%. You're doubling all damage. Lizard gains extra block proficiency, which is going to help him bait out heavies to counter. And then while the opponent has at least 2 bars of power, they are inflicted with a 100% Wither debuff, which is really nice because it means that Mystic Dispersion and other things can cause their power to go up, which is great because you want their power to go up so you deal them more damage, but it's not going to send them red. Moving on to Synergies. With Spider-Man, everyone must be lizards. All champions gain a Lizard Regeneration passive at the start of the fight, granting extra attack rating and recovering a small amount of base health. For Synergy champions in particular, so Lizard and Spider-Man, that regen recovers 5% of base health instead of 2. Just another Sinister Six with Electro, Kraven, Mysterio, Dr. Octopus, and Sandman. For those Sinister Six, when fighting against Spider-Verse heroes, on special attack activation, they gain a Pursuit passive for 13 seconds. Good against those pesky evaders. Crazy Scientists with MODOK, Mr. Sinister, and Overseer. Lizard's Unstoppable lasts longer, which is great because it also means he has attack and unblockable for longer. MODOK at the end of his special 1 inflicts a non-stacking 100% Petrify debuff for 4 seconds, making his heal reversal even stronger and a bit more persistent if you happen to need it. Then Mr. Sinister, when the opponent fails to purify 1 or more debuffs due to reduced ability accuracy, he inflicts a bleed on himself, which you of course then turn into damage. And for the Overseer, who is eating good this month, against Mystic champions in particular, gain a Steadfast passive, allowing you to block unblockables while at or above 3 gamma. Mean Greens with Sauron and Man-Thing. Sauron. I'm going to keep doing that. Anyway, Lizard, when the opponent is inflicted with a non-damaging debuff other than the Parry Mastery stun, inflict a Personal Rupture. So this obviously combos very well with Resonate. It also combos well with his tracking. And then if you're in Incursions and there are other non-dots, well, go nuts. Sauron, if the opponent purifies or cleanses the Parry Mastery stun, he gains an Unstoppable passive for 1 second, so you still get your opening. And then for Man-Thing, each hit of the special 2 nullifies an extra buff, making his making his buff control that much better, and also giving him that much more power, poison, and armor break. And then we have a generic enemies with various Spideys. Everybody on the team gets more crit rating. To touch briefly on Mastery Stat Focus and such, you can see here for offensive stat focus, the recommendation is either Block Proficiency or Adrenaline, because those let Lizard bait out heavies more, or even intentionally tank hits for regen. And then for battle casts or stat casts, there's a lot here. The Ant-Man, Hulk, Spidey 2099 relics all work well. The Hulk relic works with basically anybody who does physical bursts, as you well know. Captain America gives extra block proficiency, so really any of them are fine. But I also want to shout out on Statcasts. I'm not even sure if this exists yet, honestly, but keep an eye out for it because it will eventually if it doesn't. But a Statcast with the physical penetration primary would be really, really good for Lizard because there's nothing in his kit to reduce physical resistance, right? He doesn't have any vulnerabilities. And so that means that somebody with physical resistance is going to slow him down unless you have a relic that cuts through that. So again, I can't remember if that exists in science yet, but if it doesn't, it will eventually, and that'd be excellent for him.
And yeah, that is Lizard. Apologies about the different audio here at the end. Had a bit of a technical difficulty, but thank you all for listening to this very interesting kit. It's been long awaited. Look forward to what you're saying in the comments. And until next time, thank you so much for watching and take care.